Winter in Montana Territory, 1892. The kind where cold seeps through every crack and settles in your bones. Where silence blankets the land as thickly as snow covers the ground. This particular winter in Bitter Creek was the harshest in memory, both in weather and in spirit. Have you ever stood alone against the judgment of an entire community? Have you felt the icy stares that cut deeper than any blizzard? One woman did, and her story challenges us to examine what we would do when faced with impossible choices. The trees of the Bitterroot Forest stood like watchful sentinels around Mara Ellison's cabin. At 29, she lived alone on the edge of town, half a mile from the nearest neighbor. Not by choice, but by circumstance. 5 months earlier, she had buried her husband Nathan after a fever took him swiftly and without mercy. Grief had carved deep lines into her face, aging her beyond her years. Yet beneath her quiet exterior burned a determination that few in town recognized, or respected. "She won't last the winter alone," the townsfolk whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. "A woman needs protection out here." But Mara never asked for their protection. She trapped game, chopped wood, and tended her goats with a silent efficiency that spoke of years working alongside her husband. She wanted only to be left with her memories and her solitude. As you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, where does courage come from? Is it born from strength, or desperation? Like this video if you've ever had to stand your ground when everyone around you demanded you bend. The town of Bitter Creek itself was like many frontier settlements, a collection of wooden structures clinging to civilization amidst the wilderness. A place where laws existed but were often overshadowed by unwritten rules. Where the tensions between settlers and native tribes simmered just beneath a fragile peace. These tensions had grown worse in recent months. Rumors of Apache raids on distant homesteads traveled faster than truth. Fear mounted with each passing day, feeding a hunger for security that often manifested as hostility toward anything unfamiliar. It was against this backdrop that Mara's story began, not with a thunderous declaration, but with the quiet decision to check her trapline during a gathering storm. January 26 dawned gray and threatening. The clouds hung low, pregnant with snow, as Mara wrapped herself in her late husband's coat and strapped on her snowshoes. She tucked a knife into her belt and slung her rifle across her back, necessities, not precautions. "Be back before dark," she murmured to herself, a habit formed from years of Nathan saying those words to her. Speaking them aloud made the emptiness of her cabin slightly more bearable. The first flakes began to fall as she made her way along the familiar path, checking traps that had yielded less and less as winter deepened. Food was becoming scarce. Each empty trap meant another day of tightening her belt. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally across her path. Visibility shortened to mere yards, then feet. A sensible person would have turned back. But necessity rarely bows to sensibility, and Mara pushed forward. It was near Miller's Creek, half a mile into the forest, that something caught her attention. A dark shape against the white. At first, she thought it was a fallen tree, or perhaps a bear, though most were deep in hibernation by now. Caution slowed her steps. Her hand moved to the rifle on her back as she approached, snow crunching beneath her feet despite her attempts at silence. The shape resolved itself into the form of a man, motionless, slumped against the trunk of a pine. Blood, startlingly red against the pristine snow, pooled beneath him. His chest was bare despite the freezing temperature, marked with what appeared to be ritual scars and recent wounds. His long black hair hung in wet strands across his face. An Apache warrior, here, miles from their known territories. Time seemed to stop as Mara stood frozen, her breath clouding before her. The smart choice was clear: turn around, alert the town, let them handle this potential threat. The kind choice was equally clear: help a dying man. In that moment, Mara made a decision that would change everything. "Can you hear me?" she asked, kneeling beside him, rifle still within reach. The man's eyes fluttered open, dark, pained, but alert. They fixed on her with intensity that made her breath catch. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and recognized humanity despite every difference between you? Comment below if you've experienced a moment where compassion overrode caution. The warrior's lips moved, forming words in a language Mara didn't understand. Then, with visible effort, he switched to broken English. Kill me, or leave. His voice was rough from cold and pain. No middle path. But Mara Ellison had never been one to accept limited options. There's always another way, she replied, already shrugging off her coat to wrap around his shoulders. Can you stand? He couldn't, not fully. The wound in his leg, a clean bullet hole, had weakened him too much. With strength born of necessity, Mara hoisted him partially upright, bearing his weight against her side. The storm had intensified, transforming the forest into a whirling white prison. Every step back toward her cabin was a battle against nature itself. The man drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words she couldn't understand. By the time they reached her cabin, darkness had fallen. Mara's muscles screamed in protest as she maneuvered him through the door and onto the bed, Nathan's bed, untouched since his passing. The warrior's eyes opened again as she stoked the fire to blazing life. Fear, defiance, and something like resigned gratitude passed across his features. Why? He asked simply. Mara didn't look up from heating water for cleaning his wounds. Because you're human, she answered. And so am I. This moment, this simple acknowledgement of shared humanity, would be the foundation upon which everything that followed would rest. But neither of them could have predicted how their fates would intertwine in the days to come. Through the night, Mara worked to save the warrior's life. She cleaned his wounds, the bullet hole in his thigh, deep gashes across his shoulder and chest, bruises that told of a brutal fight. She used needles and thread to close what she could, herbs to prevent fever, and strips of clean cloth for bandages. He watched her through half-lidded eyes, tense with pain but never crying out. Only when she offered him whiskey for the pain did he speak again. Tahano, he said, placing a hand on his chest. Your name? Mara asked. He nodded. Mara, she replied, touching her own chest. Mara Ellison. It was little enough, 2 names exchanged in the quiet of a storm-besieged cabin. But it was a beginning. As dawn broke, the storm receded, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Drifts of snow piled high against the cabin walls. Branches hung low under their white burden. And in Bitter Creek, people emerged from their homes to assess the damage, unaware that their world had shifted during the night. It took less than a day for them to come. Mara was gathering more firewood when she spotted them, Reverend Porter and Sheriff Taylor leading a group of men toward her cabin. Their expressions told her everything she needed to know. Someone had seen. Perhaps Jeb Miller, whose trapline ran close to hers. Or maybe old Widow Parsons, whose cabin on the hill gave her a view of coming and going. It didn't matter who. What mattered was that they knew. Stay inside, she told Tahano, who had regained enough strength to sit upright. Whatever you hear, don't come out. He studied her face, then nodded once. They come to kill me. It wasn't a question. No, Mara said firmly. They won't. She stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind her. The approaching men slowed at the sight of her standing before the cabin, arms crossed, face set in determination. Mrs. Ellison, the sheriff called as they drew near. We need to talk. About what, Sheriff? Her voice carried across the snow-covered yard, clear and unwavering. About the Apache you're harboring. Reverend Porter spoke up, his thin face pinched with righteous certainty. Jeb Miller saw you bringing him here. I found a wounded man in the storm, Mara replied. I couldn't leave him to die. That man is an Apache warrior, one of the townsmen called out. Probably part of the group that raided the Anderson place last month. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Mara's gaze swept over them, men she had known for years, some who had attended Nathan's funeral, others who had brought food in those first difficult weeks afterward. "He has a name," she said quietly. "It's Tahano. And he was shot and left to die. Does that sound like a raiding party to you?" Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Not threatening, not yet, but a reminder of authority. Mrs. Ellison, Mara, I understand your charitable instincts. But you're putting yourself and the town at risk. Let us take him into custody." "Custody?" Mara's laugh was sharp. "You mean a cell until he's well enough to hang? Or maybe you won't wait that long." The Reverend's face darkened. "Now see here." "No, you see here," Mara cut him off. "This man is under my protection. He's done nothing wrong that any of you can prove. And I won't turn him over to a mob." The standoff stretched, tension crackling like the electricity before a storm. Finally, Sheriff Taylor sighed. "We'll be back, Mara. With more men and a proper plan. Think about what you're doing." As they trudged away, Mara remained standing in the snow until they disappeared from sight. Only then did she return inside, her heart pounding despite her outward composure. Tahano watched her with dark, perceptive eyes. "Why risk?" he asked simply. "For stranger. Enemy." Mara moved to the fireplace, adding another log although the cabin was already warm. "You're not my enemy," she said finally. "And I'm tired of letting fear decide who deserves compassion." Over the next 3 days, as Tahano's strength gradually returned, Mara learned pieces of his story. He spoke in broken phrases, supplemented by gestures and drawings made with charcoal on scraps of paper. He had been a scout, separated from his people during a hunting expedition. Attacked by white ranchers who shot first and asked no questions. Left for dead in unfamiliar territory as the storm approached. In turn, Mara shared her own story, her life with Nathan, their dreams of children never realized, the illness that took him so suddenly. The town's increasing pressure for her to remarry, to conform to their expectations of what a woman alone should do. "Your people fear what they don't understand," Tahano observed on the 4th evening. His English improved daily, revealing an intelligence that impressed Mara. "But you do not fear me. Why?" Mara considered the question, watching flames dance in the fireplace. "I fear plenty," she admitted. "But not differences. Nathan taught me that. He said fear of the unknown was just lack of curiosity." A ghost of a smile crossed Tahano's face. Wise man. He was. Grief flickered across her features, familiar but less sharp than before. "What about your people? Are you married?" Tahano shook his head. "My wife died. 2 winters passed. Sickness brought by white traders." The shared experience of loss created a bridge between them that transcended language and cultural barriers. In another life, another time, they might never have exchanged a word. Now, circumstance had made them reluctant allies against forces gathering beyond the cabin walls. In Bitter Creek, the situation was reaching a boiling point. The town hall, doubling as a church on Sundays, was packed with concerned citizens. Sheriff Taylor stood at the front, trying to maintain order as voices rose in anger and fear. "One Apache means others nearby. They could be watching us right now, planning an attack. My children can't sleep at night for fear. That Ellison woman's lost her mind since Nathan died." Reverend Porter raised his hands, calling for silence. "Brothers and sisters, please. This is indeed a matter of grave concern, but we must proceed with Christian charity as well as caution." From the back of the room, Ida Blackwood, the town's midwife and oldest resident, spoke up. "Seems to me, the only danger so far is the one we're making ourselves. Has this Apache done anything besides get himself shot and nearly frozen?" "That's not the point, Ida," countered William Foster, the general store owner. "It's what he represents. His people have raided settlements across the territory." "His people, maybe," Ida replied calmly. Not him specifically. Sheriff Taylor seized the moment of relative calm. Here's what we know, Mrs. Ellison is sheltering an injured Apache man. She refuses to turn him over. We have no evidence connecting him to any raids or crimes. So what do you propose, Sheriff? Reverend Porter asked, his tone suggesting he already found the answer lacking. We need a solution that preserves peace and safety, the sheriff said carefully. Something that satisfies both sides. It was Jacob Miller who stood up then, his voice carrying the weight of the town council behind it. I have a proposition. One that solves everything. Have you ever witnessed a community driven by fear rather than facts? Hit the like button if you believe understanding should come before judgment. A week after finding Tejano, Mara noticed a change in the air. The town had grown quiet, no more delegations, no more threats. Just silence, which worried her more than confrontation. Tejano felt it too. He had progressed to moving around the cabin, though the leg wound still limited him. He fashioned a crutch from a forked branch, refusing to remain bedridden any longer than necessary. They planned something, he said, watching Mara chop wood. I should leave. You can barely walk, she pointed out, embedding the axe in the chopping block and gathering an armful of split logs. And where would you go? Your people are 100 miles south, and there's 2 feet of snow on the ground. Better than bringing trouble to you. Mara paused, studying him. In the days they'd spent together, she'd come to respect his quiet dignity, his resilience, his unexpected flashes of humor. He wasn't the savage the townspeople imagined, just as she wasn't the helpless widow they believed her to be. I chose this, she reminded him. Nobody forced me to help you. Before he could respond, they both noticed the approaching party. Unlike before, this wasn't just the sheriff and a few men. This was nearly the entire town, walking in solemn procession toward the cabin. Go inside, Mara urged, but Tejano stood his ground beside her, leaning heavily on his crutch. We face together, he said simply. The procession stopped a respectful distance from the cabin. Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, his expression grave but determined. Beside him stood Jacob Miller, head of the town council, and Reverend Porter, Bible clutched to his chest. Mrs. Ellison, the sheriff began. We've come to resolve this situation. Mara's hand tightened on the axe handle still embedded in the chopping block. What situation would that be, Sheriff? The town has reached a decision, Jacob Miller announced, his voice carrying across the yard. A compromise that will satisfy everyone's concerns. Reverend Porter stepped forward, opening his Bible. Mrs. Ellison, this Apache man has caused considerable distress among our community. However, we recognize your attachment to him. Something in his tone made Mara's skin crawl. Therefore, he continued, we propose a solution based in Christian charity and practical necessity. Jacob Miller took over. We want you to marry him. For a moment, Mara thought she had misheard. Marry him, she repeated, disbelief evident in every syllable. Yes, Reverend Porter nodded solemnly. It solves everything. If he becomes your husband, he becomes your responsibility. No longer a threat but a member of our community, under your guidance, of course. The audacity of their proposal left Mara momentarily speechless. They were attempting to control her under the guise of compromise, to force her hand while pretending to offer a solution. And if I refuse, she asked quietly. Sheriff Taylor shifted uncomfortably. Then we'll have no choice but to remove him, by force if necessary, for the safety of this town. Mara looked at the gathered faces, some smug, others uncomfortable, a few openly hostile. Then she turned to Tejano, who watched the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Have you asked him what he wants? She demanded. Or doesn't the savage get a say in his own fate? Her deliberate use of their term caused murmurs among the crowd. Tejano straightened as much as his injured leg allowed. With dignity that silenced the murmurs, he addressed the gathering. My people have word, he said in careful English. Gadoahe. Means, from below. What you call Apache. Not savage. Not enemy. Unless you make me one. Have you ever seen someone completely shatter others' expectations of them? Comment if you've witnessed prejudice crumble in the face of dignity. I not want force this woman, he continued, gesturing to Mara. She saved my life. I honor her. But marriage is sacred. Not tool for fear. His simple eloquence held the crowd spellbound. Here was not the bloodthirsty warrior of their imagination but a man expressing principles they claimed to value themselves. Jacob Miller recovered first. Fine words. But they don't change the fact that your presence here threatens our peace. Your peace. Mara's laugh was harsh. There was no peace threatened until you imagined it so. This man has done nothing to any of you. Mrs. Ellison, Reverend Porter said, his patience visibly thinning. You must understand our position. Either you marry this man and take responsibility for him, or we remove him. Those are the options. Mara's gaze swept over the crowd, searching for allies, finding few. Even those who might privately disagree lacked the courage to speak up. Except one. This isn't right. The voice came from the back of the group. Heads turned to find Ida Blackwood making her way forward, leaning on her walking stick. Ida, stay out of this, Jacob Miller warned. I've been in this town since before you were born, Jacob Miller, the old woman retorted. Delivered half of you into this world. So I'll speak my piece. She turned to address the gathering. Look at yourselves. Armed men threatening a widow and an injured man. Is this what Bitter Creek stands for now? Fear turning decent folks into a mob. Her words struck home with some. Uncomfortable glances were exchanged. A few people stepped back, distancing themselves from the confrontation. We're protecting our families, someone called out. From what? Ida challenged. From a man who can barely stand. Or from the idea that we might be wrong about people we don't understand. The crowd's resolve wavered, but Jacob Miller stood firm. We've made our decision, Ida. Mrs. Ellison has until sundown tomorrow to give us her answer. As the townspeople dispersed, their united front fractured by doubt, Mara, Tahano, and Ida remained in the yard, three figures against the vast white landscape. Thank you, Mara said simply. Ida snorted. Don't thank me yet. They'll be back, and with fewer doubts next time. She eyed Tahano appraisingly. You heal fast. Fast enough, he replied with the ghost of a smile. Good. You'll need your strength. The old woman turned to Mara. Come see me tonight. After dark. I have an idea. That night, after Ida left, Mara and Tahano sat in silence for a long time. The ultimatum hung between them, impossible to ignore yet difficult to address. I go, Tahano said finally. Before dawn. Follow Creek south. Find my people. You'll freeze, Mara argued. Or they'll track you. Your leg isn't fully healed. Better than force you to choice. Mara studied him across the table. In just over a week, this man had transformed from stranger to, what? Not quite friend, but something equally important. Someone who saw her clearly, who understood her determination to make her own choices. There's another option, she said slowly. We could leave together. Tahano's eyebrows rose in surprise. Nothing holds me here, she continued. Not since Nathan died. I could start fresh somewhere people don't look at me with pity or expectation. Dangerous journey, he warned. For woman alone with Apache. More dangerous than staying here, waiting for the next ultimatum. The next time they decide what's best for the widow Ellison. Something shifted in Tahano's expression, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. He nodded slowly. We go together, he agreed. But not as husband and wife. No, Mara said firmly. As allies. They worked through the night, gathering only what was essential. Food, warm clothing, Nathan's old revolver, the rifle, ammunition, basic tools. Mara constructed a small sled that Tahano could pull once his leg healed further. For now, they would travel slowly, carefully, following Ida's suggested route through less traveled passes. As dawn approached, Mara took a final look around the cabin that had been her home for 7 years. The memories would travel with her, but the physical reminders, Nathan's chair by the fire, the quilt they had shared, the marks on the doorframe measuring dreams of children, those she would leave behind. Ready? Tahano asked softly from the doorway. Mara nodded, squaring her shoulders. Ready. They slipped away as the first light touched the eastern mountains, following Miller's Creek south. Their tracks would be discovered soon enough, but by then, they would have a substantial head start. What waited for them beyond Bitter Creek was uncertain. Danger, certainly. Hardship, without question. But also possibility, the chance to define themselves rather than be defined by others' expectations and fears. Sheriff Taylor was the one who found the note, pinned to Mara's door with her husband's hunting knife. To the people of Bitter Creek. I choose neither of your options. Instead, I take a third path, my own. By the time you read this, we will be far from here, harming none of you, asking nothing from you. Judge less. Listen more. Fear blinds us to truth and humanity. Mara Ellison. The sheriff read it twice before handing it to Reverend Porter, whose face darkened with each word. She's run off with him, Jacob Miller said incredulously. A white woman choosing to leave with a savage. A woman choosing freedom over control, Ida Blackwood corrected from the edge of the gathering. Can't say I blame her. Sheriff Taylor sighed heavily, already knowing what would be demanded of him. I'll organize a search party. No, Ida's voice cut through the murmurs of agreement. You won't. All eyes turned to her. That woman has broken no law, the elderly midwife continued. Neither has that man, far as any of you have proved. They left to escape persecution, not to cause harm. She can't just, Jacob Miller began. She can and did, Ida interrupted. And if you send men after them, you prove every word in that note true. A heavy silence fell over the group. The sheriff looked from the note to the distant mountains, then back to the expectant faces of Bitter Creek's leading citizens. Ida's right, he said finally. We have no legal grounds to pursue them. And maybe we should consider why a woman who lived her whole life among us chose to leave rather than bend to our will. 2 months later, as winter released its grip on the mountains, Mara and Tahano made their way through a high valley lush with early spring growth. Their journey had been arduous but transformative. They had survived blizzards, close encounters with both wildlife and hostile settlers, and periods of hunger when game was scarce. Through it all, they had developed a partnership based on mutual respect and shared determination. Tahano had taught Mara the ways of his people, how to read the land, find water, move silently through forests. She, in turn, had shared knowledge of settlements to avoid, plants that could heal, and words that might bridge cultural divides. They were not husband and wife, as Bitter Creek had tried to force them to be. Nor were they merely traveling companions. They had become something without easy definition, two people who had chosen freedom together rather than subjugation apart. Your people near, Tahano said as they made camp that evening. Perhaps 2 days' journey. Mara nodded, stirring the small fire. And then? The question had lingered unspoken between them for weeks. What happened when they reached the Apache camp? Would she continue alone? Return to white settlements? Or was there another path? My people will welcome you, Tahano said carefully. If you choose to stay. Or guide you safely to new place, if you wish go. Mara looked up at the emerging stars, so much brighter here than they had ever seemed in Bitter Creek. I've been thinking, she said slowly, about continuing west. California, maybe. Or Oregon. Somewhere I can start fresh, with no one knowing me as poor widow Ellison. Tahano nodded, understanding in his eyes. Good land there. New beginning. Would you? Mara hesitated, then continued with determination. Would you consider coming with me? Not as my protector or guide, but as my friend. We make a good team. For a long moment, Tahano was silent, gazing into the flames. Then he looked up, meeting her eyes directly. I would be honored, he said simply. New beginning. For both. The decision wasn't romantic, neither of them was ready for that, perhaps never would be. But it was profound in its own way. Two people from worlds that had taught them to fear each other, choosing instead to face the future side by side. They would face prejudice, certainly. Danger, without doubt. But they would face it on their own terms, defining themselves rather than being defined by others. In the years that followed, the story of Mara and Tahano became legend in both communities. Among the Apache, it was told as a tale of respect transcending boundaries. In Bitter Creek, it evolved into a cautionary tale about the consequences of fear and control, how attempting to force conformity often results in losing what you sought to contain. And far to the west, in a coastal town where the pounding surf drowned out judgmental whispers, a woman and a man built separate but intertwined lives. Not as husband and wife, but as business partners in a trading post that bridged two worlds, where Apache crafts were valued alongside settler goods, where languages mingled, and where the question, where are you from, was less important than, who are you now? That is true freedom, not the absence of ties, but the right to choose which bonds define us. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more tales from the West that challenge our assumptions and reveal the complexity behind simplified history. Share in the comments your thoughts on Mara's choice. Would you have had the courage to forge your own path? Until next time, remember that the most important boundaries aren't found on maps, but in the limitations we place on our own humanity.